Hi, it's Keith from the Evangelical Free Church, Stony Stratford. And this is our final Easter talk from the book of the prophet Zechariah. And the verse comes from Zechariah chapter 13 and verse 1. On that day, a fountain will be opened to the house of David and the inhabitants of Jerusalem to cleanse them from sin and impurity. This verse comes immediately after the section we were looking at on Good Friday. This is where God had poured out a spirit of grace and supplication, and the people were humbled and mourned over their sins. There's a picture of undeserved grace being extended, but what's that going to take? What form of action must that take? As you probably gathered, I'm a big fan of the films The Lord of the Rings and of course the book. I love the book. But there's a very notable part in the films where there's a discussion about who's going to take the ring to Mordor. And in the end, when there seems to be no decision, Frodo steps forward. He may not seem the best equipped person to do it, but he is the person. And he takes action, so he's going to do it. You see, the situation here is about God acting. Why? Because we can't. It was interesting that it was God who poured out the spirit of grace and supplication, and now he does something else. Do you notice the same day? On that day, a fountain will be opened. There's a picture of water. And in the Old Testament, the book of Leviticus, you look at it up in Leviticus 14 and verse 6, there is the act of washing and water that washes and purifies people symbolically. And so here's the picture here. The people have confessed their sins, so God is going to take action and allow them the means by which they might be washed and made pure from their sins. In other words, he provides forgiveness. And as I said, it's that day. It's instant. Just as it was on that day in the verse after the verses we were looking at on Good Friday. On that day, the weeping in Jerusalem will be great. But out of this weeping comes the joyous nature of being forgiven. And this is extended to people that God calls to him. The house of David, that would have been Israel in those days. That is the people of God today. People that God is seeking to call to himself. It's a wonderful picture, isn't it, of the forgiveness of sin. And it's been made possible by the act of Jesus' death, becoming a substitute for our sin, volunteering to take our sin, as it says in 2 Corinthians chapter 5 and verse 21, he who was without sin became sin, that we might become the righteousness of God. In other words, giving his righteousness and taking our sin. And through his resurrection, here is proof that we can be forgiven. If the story ended at the cross, so what? What does that prove? A good man dies. Good men die every day, perhaps. But it doesn't change anything much in the long run, does it? Well, Jesus' death and resurrection change everything. There's a wonderful picture in the vision at the end of the Bible. This is John in the book of Revelation. And it's chapter 7. Just listen to these verses 13 and 14. Then one of the elders asked me, these in the white robes, who are they and where did they come from? I answered, Sir, you know. And he said, these are they who have come out of the great tribulation. They have washed their robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb. Can you see the symbolism there? Through Jesus' death, we are washed clean through his sacrifice. Well, what's the final bit of good news? Revelation chapter 7 again, verse 17. For the Lamb at the centre of the throne will be their shepherd. He will lead them to springs of living water, and God will wipe away every tear from their eyes. Here's the good picture. The Lamb represents Jesus Christ. It's a picture of him as a shepherd taking care of his people. The living water is this promise of a life with him forever. And here's the good news. All the bad things will be taken away, and God will wipe away every tear from their eyes. We live in a pretty unpleasant world. There's death and there's pain. But that's because of our failings and our sin. God is making all things new if you will put your trust in him and seek forgiveness. Thank you so much for listening. There's a book. You can get this from the front of the church on the railings. Absolutely free. The Real Easter. That would be worth reading if you have any more that you'd like to sort of check up on about what Jesus' death and resurrection means. Thank you so much for listening.